Hello, my name is Sarah, and this is a review, something that I have not done in a while. And I'm excited to be back. I'm excited to share my thoughts about a book. I feel like this is when I'm at my prime on my channel, when I'm talking about the content of a book. Sad to report though that the review that I have today for you guys isn't a gushing one. It's not one that is going to be overly positive. In fact, I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars and was heavily disappointed by it. And the book that I'm referencing is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. So if this name sounds familiar, it's because I have reviewed another book by this author. I reviewed Sorcery of Thorns, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars, so that wasn't a negative read by any stretch of the imagination. And I've also hauled this book and Sorcery of Thorns, so this isn't a new name to my channel. So An Enchantment of Ravens is a YA fantasy romance that was released in 2017. It was actually Rogerson's debut novel, with Sorcery of Thorns being her sophomore book, her second book. This book clocks in at about 297 pages, so it's about half the size of Sorcery of Thorns. And when I get into all of my negative stuff, I think the size of the book plays a large part in my lack of enjoyment in it, along with this book again being the debut novel. And I feel like whenever I negatively review a debut book, I should just let it be known that this is an author's first work out there, and there's always room to grow. And again, I did enjoy Sorcery of Thorns, so obviously the author did grow in between this book and Sorcery of Thorns. So despite, again, this review being negative, I am excited to see what the author releases next. So that's my little disclaimer. So basically, An Enchantment of Ravens is about a girl named Isabel who lives in a world where fairies are, surprise, real. It's not a kind of world where fairies are just human plus, they're not just humans but they live forever, they're more attractive, they're more powerful, they're just better than humans. No, in this world, fairies they do live forever, and they do have magical abilities. They have the ability to enchant, but they also have massive setbacks, and one of the setbacks being that they cannot craft, they cannot create. The fairies cannot create anything. They can't cook for themselves, they can't sew, they can't paint, which is bad news for them because they can't do those things. And they also lack the depth of emotions humans feel. So bad news for them, but it's good news for people who can craft, Isabel being one of them. Isabella is an amazing painter, and she is well known in the Fae world as being one of the best people to go to for portraits. And this is how she makes her earning once a month, her income. One day, a Prince of Fae, Rook, comes to her doorsteps asking for a portrait to be painted of him. And Isabel makes the mistake of painting mortal sorrow in his eyes. So painting despair, painting human emotion onto his face. And this is taken as a massive insult by Rook, and he takes her and forces her to stand trial in his kingdom. But along the journey from the village that Isabel lives in to this kingdom to stand trial, they are attacked and things just go awry. Now let's get into the good things that I liked about this book, because there were things that I enjoyed about this book. The first of which being the writing, specifically the imagery. I loved how Rogerson made the book feel like every scene felt like a painting, the imagery was just breathtaking. It was very descriptive. It was just really well done. It felt magical. It felt whimsical. It felt like the person who was telling the story, it felt like they were a painter, and this story is told from Isabel's point of view, so that does make sense. It was just really well done, and even though a lot of things in this story fall apart after about the 20% mark, the writing, in my opinion, the writing style with the beautiful imagery and the beautiful writing choices and all that, the writing style was solid throughout the reading experience. So that was one thing that I really enjoyed. I have a little excerpt to kind of sample what I mean. Again, this is a spoiler-free review, so I won't really be spoilering any major plot points, but this is from, I'm holding the book upside down. I was like, why I put the dust jacket on upside down? Whatever. But this is literally from the second page. This excerpt is Isabel describing a fae. Gadfly appeared to be a man in his middle 30s. Like every example of his kind, he was tall, slim, and beautiful. His eyes were the clear crystal blue of the sky after rain has washed away the summer heat, his complexion as pale and flawless as porcelain, and his hair the radiant silver gold of dew illuminated by sunrise. I know it sounds ridiculous, but fair folk require such comparisons. There's simply no other way to describe them. The writing was good. The writing was solid, is what I'm trying to say. Next, the lore. So like I said, the Fae in this world, they have a lot of setbacks. They don't experience human emotions properly. They aren't able to craft. They can't do a wide range of things. And even the magical abilities that they do have, it's all just illusionary. Like, they don't have the ability to really tamper with stuff. They can just tamper with the way it looks, which makes them very vain, very shallow, and it makes their long lives like it's a setback. And I really enjoyed that, especially since most fairy stories, especially in YA, like they're just, like I said earlier, they're human plus, they're just humans but better in every single way. And I mean, that's all fine and dandy, but it makes it uninteresting to me, you know? Like, obviously everyone wants to be Fae in those kind of stories. But in this story, there is an argument to be had for remaining human, remaining mortal, even if you are given the option to become Fae. And that reason is, first of all, when a human becomes Fae, which is extremely rare, when a human does become Fae in this world, they lose the ability to craft, which sucks because usually the people who are gifted the ability to become Fae are people who are renowned for their craft, right? Like, they're an amazing artist. So, you know, the Fae are like, oh, you're not that bad. Let's keep you around forever. Let's take you to the well so that you could become Fae with us. But in drinking from the well and becoming Fae, they also lose the capability of producing their art. They lose the capability of writing. They lose the capability of so many things that mean dear to us as humans, you know? They also lose the capability of feeling human emotions, which I think is devastating. In stacking the decks against both the Fae and the humans, and Rogerson taking that time to kind of craft this lore around what it means to be Fae and what it means to be human, and how they're very distinct and separate and different, and how both sides need one another, and this kind of balance of, you know, humans need enchantment, but these Faes need craft. They need these worldly goods that they can't produce themselves. It was just really well done, in my opinion. Yeah, so that was one other thing that I enjoyed about the story. Another thing that I enjoyed about the story was the establishment of stakes. I enjoyed about the first 20% of this book, truly. I feel like, I'll get more into this later, but I enjoyed the beginning of this book, the setup of the stakes. The end was, but the beginning was really solid, and part of that is in how Rogerson established stakes, right? Humans can be Fae, but at a cost. There is a law prohibiting romance between a Fae and a human. There's constant threats of trickery and attempts on lives, and it's all very dramatic and it's all very dire. And Rogerson does a really good job of making it seem impossible that these two characters can't be together, which made me feel like, okay, yeah, I can get behind these. Even if I don't care about the characters particularly, even if I don't care about the world, I feel the tension that these stakes bring along with it. You know, it's something that I can look forward to. And although the resolution of these stakes was shit, like it was not done well, I can still appreciate the effort and the skill that went into setting up these stakes. So that was one other thing that I enjoyed. Now let's get into the bad. I'm gonna separate the bad into 3 different categories. First, I'm gonna talk about plot, then I'm going to talk about romance, then I'm gonna talk about characters, and then whatever else comes to mind. The story structure felt off to me. Like I mentioned earlier, I really did enjoy the first 20%. The setup, the world building was promising at first, but everything started to fall apart around the middle. The middle felt very muddled to me. It felt very meandering. It felt pointless. Despite there being kind of like a built-in plot, you know, the story follows a journey. You know, they're going from, these characters, Rook and Isabel, are going from point A to point B. So you would think that the plotting part wouldn't be the hardest. Like there are clear structural beats for the author to follow, but she didn't follow any of them properly. At least I didn't enjoy any of them. The middle just felt like one massive waste. And it was clear that the author emphasized relationship building over the plot of the story, the actual like plot, which is okay because this is a fantastical romance. Like, of course, the romance is going to be emphasized, but like I didn't care about the romance which I'll get more into that later. That's my tagline. I'll get more into that later. I didn't really enjoy the romance. I didn't enjoy the plot. This whole thing felt meandering, and I feel like one massive part of that was because the characters physically, like, they kept backtracking, right? They're on a journey. They're trying to get to Rook's kingdom, his court, his whatever, right? And constantly they're like, let's go this way. Oh no, something's wrong with this way. Let's backtrack to where we began and then go this way. Oh no, there's something wrong with that. Let's go take this detour. Oh, there's something, let's take this detour here. Like, these characters never physically made any progress, which made me feel like they were stagnating. It made me feel restless. It made me feel like, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? We're not making any progress. Like, the relationship isn't making any progress. These characters are physically not making any progress. Like, this is all so freaking pointless. It was all very muddled for me personally, and just whatever. It was just a mess, right? And at this point, when I was reading the book, when I was in the middle of the book, I wanted to DNF this book so hard, right? I was like, okay, this is getting really difficult. I don't want this to be my last read of 2019. But I pushed through because, again, the stakes that were established in the first part were very promising, and the writing was, like, it was still beautiful. Like, I really enjoyed the writing style. So I kind of forced myself to get through, and I thought naively at this point that the middle would be the worst part of the book, which was not the case whatsoever. So yeah, the middle, a mess, right? It does not hold a flame to the ending. After finishing this book, the main emotion that I felt was disbelief that I had wasted about 300 pages on this pure bullshit, you know? Like, I was so severely let down. I was filled with disappointment and disbelief, and basically all the tension that I held on to from the first part of the book, the beginning of the book, all the stakes that were established, it was all pointless. It was like the end of the book, the author presented an Uno reverse card and was like, you thought this would be interesting, bitch? Like, no. I was expecting the book to end in a crescendo, like these stakes were going to be resolved, but it would be resolved in a clever way, or there would be like substantial sacrifices made by these characters as a way to show their devotion, or whatever it may be. But none of that happened. Like, literally the author chose the most plain, most bullshit, like BS way out of the mess that she made. It's like she backed herself into a corner with these stakes and was like, you know what, I'll just set the entire book on fire. Like, fuck it. Like, she chose the most simple, plain, unimaginative resolution to the story, and I just was so disappointed. I was so disappointed. And not only that, like, at the end of the book, like, she left a bunch of plot threads still hanging. A lot of things are implied, but nothing is concrete, and I just really did not enjoy that. I've already hinted at the romance being a bit of a disappointment, but I just did not care for the characters at all, right? Like, I just did not care for the characters. I didn't care for Rook. I didn't care for Isabel. I was just in it for the stake resolution, which was a big fucking mess at the end, so that was pointless to begin with, but I just did not care for the romance at all. And I'm sure I would have enjoyed this book significantly more had I given a single shit about Rook and Isabel, but that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case. First of all, Isabel and Rook had no chemistry, in my opinion. The romance did not feel authentic. It felt more so like the author needed a romance to fill the space, so she's like, may as well, these two characters are together, they're traveling together, so may as well throw them together too romantically. But there was no chemistry there. I didn't feel it. It felt too forced, you know, too fast, too forced. It felt a bit insta-lovey. I just did not enjoy that at all. Another thing that I didn't enjoy about this romance specifically was the fact that these two characters had nothing in common, like literally nothing. And an argument can be made for the opposites attract trope. In fact, I like the opposites attract trope whenever it's done really, really well, but usually when it's done well, there's some kind of overlap between the characters. These two characters in an opposites attract trope, they have shared values or shared history or like shared characteristics, experiences. They have something in common, or, you know, maybe they have nothing in common, but they fill each other's gaps, right? Like, they complement each other really, really well, but that also comes along with chemistry. There wasn't a you make me better angle to it, or a maybe we're not so different after all angle to it. Like, it was just these two characters, Rook and Isabel. They're two ends of an extreme to the point where it just does not make sense to put them together, in my opinion. Isabel is a 17-year-old human artist who is practical. Rook is a restless prince of Fae who is presumably hundreds if not thousands of years old. He's a warrior, she's practical, like, they have nothing in common. She's also 17. Did I mention she's 17? She's 17, which, I mean, YA has made it a habit of trying to make these kind of age gap relationships sexy, but I felt like throughout the story, I really did not get to know any of the characters. I think part of that can be blamed on just the sheer lack of pages. Like, this is again under 300 pages, which is really short in my opinion for a fantasy. There are some some characteristics I know of the characters. Like, I know some of the traits that these characters have. I know that Isabel's really good at painting. Her parents died. She has twin goat sisters, which was a really interesting aspect of the story that I wish the author had put more time into, but whatever. I know things about Rook, that he's a prince, he's restless in nature, he loves action, he's a warrior. But all of these things were established really early on in the story, and the characters just didn't really change from then on. Rook sure as hell didn't. At least you could argue that maybe Isabel learned to stop being so practical in nature and like trust her emotions. And they just felt very two-dimensional. I don't know how to describe it, because I know a lot of people did enjoy these characters. I just didn't, and maybe that's just because I didn't click with them, but they felt very flat to me. And another reason as to why this might be the case is because the plot did not make it easy for me to get to know them. There wasn't really anything happening for them to do anything with. Like, the entire structure of the story was very reactionary. I think the most telling thing that Isabel did throughout this book was paint mortal sorrow onto the face of Rook, like onto the portrait of Rook. But aside from that, like, everything that they do from then on is pretty much reactionary until the end, kind of, sorta, which doesn't make for growth. Like, they were very reactionary, and reactionary characters are just boring by nature. And then lastly, I want to mention the world building. One thing that felt off about the setting for me, or the world building, or whichever this would fall into, honestly, I don't have the fucking brain cells for this right now, is how it all felt extremely underdeveloped. When I read fantasies that I genuinely enjoy, most of the time, if I put a book down, I can imagine the characters in other rooms doing other things that aren't essential to the plot. Like, they exist when I close the book. The world exists when I close the book. That was not the case with this book. If Rogerson had not explicitly spelled out a scene for me, I could not imagine it. And even still, like, I could not imagine Isabel running to the local village store to get stuff, because the world just feels so unestablished to me. It's just like a lot of white space, right? Like, it's like, here's a painted scene that Rogerson provided very beautifully with her wonderful words, and then just like a bunch of white space, you know? Like, the world stops where Rogerson stops describing it, and that's not how a good fantasy should leave me feeling. I should feel like the world doesn't, like, it's ever expanding. I should feel like it's as vivid and well developed as our tangible real world, but again, that wasn't the case, and that just follows the thread of everything about this book being super unfucking satisfying. But you know, whatever. Maybe this is just, again, Rogerson's style. I felt similar to how I feel now about Sorcery of Thorns, obviously not nearly as negative, but I felt the same kind of emotions. Like, I felt the same concerns for Sorcery of Thorns, and a lot of people enjoyed both of these books, so I'm thinking maybe it's just a stylistic difference in which I don't enjoy this more whimsical, rough around the edge, fairy tale-esque story where everything is more implied than solidified. Like, I just don't like those kind of stories. This book is way more fluffy whimsy over substance, and if you want a fun fantasy read, I still wouldn't recommend this book to you, but I know a lot of people would. For me, the substance of the plot and the romance is just not enough to justify even 300 pages, despite that not being such a large amount. Some people loved An Enchantment of Ravens, but for me, it just felt very unsatisfying. It felt very hollow. It felt very, like, there was a lot to be desired. I feel like this isn't truly a fantasy. It's not truly a romance either. It was just 300 pages of meandering bullshit about characters I don't care about. Is that mean? I feel like that's mean. My 2020 New Year's resolution was to not be so mean in my videos. So I am Sarah. You have been reviewing with Sarah. Bye-bye.